Well, to answer your first question first, no, the UK does not have the foresight to do that. The standard responses we get are that the government will not consider the creation of a UK strategic reserve.
Hello and welcome to another episode from our expert series, where today we have the Chief Policy Officer from Bitcoin Policy UK, Freddie New himself. Welcome to the channel, Freddie. I hope you're well. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm well, Jamie. Thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here. So thank you for the intro. As you said, I'm Chief Policy Officer at Bitcoin Policy UK. We are an advocacy group, and we'll go into some of our work later in the session, but a lot of our focus is on providing good quality research and information on Bitcoin to politicians and regulators. In addition to that, I'm also the CEO at BHODL, which is a new Bitcoin treasury and services company. We're sort of putting into practice part of what we preach at Bitcoin Policy UK, setting up a new company listed in the UK, listed this week actually. Interesting experience there, and really demonstrating that it is possible, we hope, to build a treasury and paytech business focused on Bitcoin in the United Kingdom.
Sounds like you're an extremely busy man, Freddie. So I really do appreciate you spending some time with me on the channel to help educate, hopefully, even more people. The first thing I want to bring up is the topic of Bitcoin within the UK itself. Now, with someone who's in your position, you must have some form of opinion on it, whether it's positive, negative, where it could go and stuff like that. So in terms of Bitcoin in the UK, where do we stand compared to the rest of the world, for example?
It's an interesting question. Bitcoin is strangely poorly understood in the United Kingdom. It's difficult fully to understand why, but I've certainly found, as part of our advocacy work, when you visit other countries or other jurisdictions, the amount of usage is much higher. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is possibly because our payment systems are actually relatively good in the United Kingdom, even compared with the United States. So simply as a medium of exchange, there's less use for a digital money to that degree, I think, than, for example, if you're in a country whose banking system doesn't function properly, maybe then you'd look at an alternative. So I think that's one reason. I'd also say that Bitcoin is relatively poorly understood, both at the sort of level of the person in the street and also at the regulatory and political level. Part of that is a relatively long period of, I think, poorly written articles or misinformation in the general media. And you know how these things are. Ordinarily, the first thing you read about a subject is the thing that you remember. So if someone read a Guardian article that Bitcoin is burning the planet or is only used by criminals, that's probably all they'll ever read about Bitcoin, in fairness, and so that's what they know about it.
Yeah, I think I'd absolutely agree with everything you've said just there, Freddie. For example, if any of our listeners and viewers would Google Bitcoin UK right now, I can almost guarantee the top 3, 5, maybe even more articles will be some form of negative connotation, whether it's a case of £1 billion of Bitcoin seized from the dark web, or, some form of stigma that still somehow is part of it, even though we've made so much progress over the years trying to change that from not only a retailer's perspective, but from people like yourself with governmental personnel. And I think it's very important that the education around what Bitcoin actually is and how it actually works to be delivered consistently from as many media avenues as possible. Hence, one of the big reasons why I have this YouTube channel specifically, as well as, TikTok and Twitter itself, is to be able to do that. So what do you think will happen within the UK in terms of Bitcoin adoption from from an institutional perspective? Do you have any predictions around that? Is there anything you can share with us that you might know, perhaps?
Adoption, I'd say, has been creeping up. This is something that I think often happens from the ground up and is therefore missed by by the financial press sometimes. So the latest FCA figures that I've seen suggest that about 12% of adults in the UK hold Bitcoin, which doesn't sound like many until you realize that it's about 7 million people. 7 million people is quite a significant number. A lot of those people will perhaps hold their Bitcoin in Coinbase, or they may just have Dogecoin or something else. But it's nevertheless a significant number of people, and 7 million people is enough to swing elections. I don't think many politicians realize that yet, because this is a bottom-up, ground-up movement. It's not something that's been imposed by a policy or by a law. And as a result, I think we're in a position now where a lot of MPs are not aware that their constituents may be interested in this space or may have price exposure to it. So I think that's one point in terms of, I suppose that's more of a political adoption or political awareness than the institutional adoption. So in terms of institutional adoption, the FCA has obviously had very restrictive policies around the retail access in particular to exchange-traded products that give exposure to cryptocurrency. It's recently relented in terms, and we may talk about this in a moment, in terms of access to exchange-traded notes. And another thing that we've seen begin to crop up in the UK over the last few years is the emergence of Bitcoin treasury companies. So SWC being the most famous and the largest by market cap. We ourselves are also a Bitcoin treasury and services company at BHODL. We IPO'd on Monday. And I think the general message here is it's almost a circle because it swings out from the politicians into the commercial world and then back again. So the fact that companies working in the space are choosing to list in London should, I think, be seen only as a positive particularly by the Treasury and by government in general. As you all know, the London IPO market has been relatively stagnant for quite a long time. In terms of commercial activity and IPO activity, we've got, I think, a real chance to perhaps make London a second listing hub for companies that are operating in that space. And then that has a flywheel effect. It becomes a virtuous circle. The more of these companies list here, the more capital is pulled into the London markets, the more deals are being done. All of the advisors are happy because they get paid. And this should really play into the Labour Party's growth desires. To be honest, in fairness, I don't think there's any party who wants degrowth rather than maybe the Greens, but that's another conversation. So I think the message there is that if you're having increased number of listings from companies working in this space and a burgeoning sector really developing in London and the UK, that should only be a good thing for politicians and perhaps get them away from thinking that cryptocurrency is just evil and only for criminals.
I find the irony absolutely hilarious that the decentralized asset of Bitcoin specifically now has huge political impact internationally, globally, in its entirety, to the point where exactly what you said, if someone were to come out with a crypto-based bill, for example, they will win votes, whether it's all 7 million or majority of it, it will certainly swing votes. Now, I'm aware that Nigel Farage a few months ago has mentioned a crypto bill that he would like to implement. This included his vision for the UK to become a sandbox for growth within the space, as well as reducing capital gains tax, maybe on crypto assets only or for capital gains tax fully down to 10%, which is phenomenal in terms of that vision. Regardless of anyone's political stance, you cannot deny that pure determination to win votes. Because let's be honest here. Yes, it's all great to grow. Yes, it's great to reduce taxes where applicable. But let's be honest here. Politicians want votes. They need votes. And from what I've seen online, it is starting to swing people and make a difference. I put a tweet out asking my followers, if he were able to promise this and make this happen, would you vote for Nigel Farage? And a lot of them said, absolutely, because it's going to hit their back pockets and they can see the vision regardless of his other agenda, shall we say, or perceived agenda at the very least. So I think, that comment on that is crucial to remember that even if you're not a political person, it's prevalent, whether you like it or not. And we really need to start paying attention to all of this. So within the US as well, we have a lot of talk about Bitcoin reserves. I saw news, I think yesterday, that they might not be doing that now and it's swinging back and forth. Do we think that the UK has the foresight to perhaps have a Bitcoin reserve? If so, is it going to be a positive for us, do you think?
Well, to answer your first question first, no, the UK does not have the foresight to do that. And I can cite chapter and verse. We've actually been corresponding with 5 different city ministers now. That's how quick the changeover has been at the top. on these matters, and I'll explain why in a second, the standard responses we get are that the government will not consider the creation of a UK strategic reserve. It still regards Bitcoin as a joke, too volatile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've published our correspondence on our website at BP UK, so that's in our work portfolio. So you can see the letters we've written to ministers and the replies that we've had from ministers on these subjects. Same answer every time. In terms of if we did have the foresight, I'm actually in two minds around Bitcoin as a reserve asset. I think the store of value narrative is undeniable, and that's reflected in where the price is now and where it was 5 years ago. But I've always really liked Bitcoin for its censorship resistance and its embodiment of the ability to make a payment to anyone, wherever, without having to provide any identification. It's a simple payment in digital cash from me to you. That's what's always appealed to me about it. And if Bitcoin is simply sitting in a reserve, not doing anything, then I feel it's, but then again, it's a free system. This is my opinion. Anyone, I think, is entitled to use Bitcoin for whatever purpose they see fit. And so even though I might have a bit of a reservation about a reserve, sorry, that's a terrible joke.
I'm not cutting that, Freddie. I'm keeping that
in. So even if I have myself in two minds around a strategic reserve, I can see from a national point of view, it's potentially going to be enormously valuable, and particularly because the arrow of learning about Bitcoin, much like the arrow of time, only really points in one direction. The more people that learn about it, it stays learned. And once you become interested in Bitcoin, you tend to retain that interest. And I think that will happen at a macro level as well. So the reason that we've been writing to ministers about the UK's Bitcoin reserve is, obviously, I'm sure most of your listeners and watchers will know, the UK already holds more than 61,000 Bitcoin from various different confiscations. And that makes it, we think, the third biggest nation state holder in the world. So although I might have, second thoughts about a strategic reserve, our messaging to government has been, you guys already hold 61,000 coins. That's worth north of £5 billion. You need to learn about this asset. You need to study the space. You need to understand why it's valuable, because you're administering that 5 billion pot of wealth on behalf of you and me, on behalf of the nation. And at the moment, in fact, if you pause to think about it, it's utterly idiotic. If the government had a storeroom of gold that was worth $5 billion, do you think they would reply to a letter and say, oh, no, we don't think this is worth anything. We'll just leave the door open. It's too volatile for us to include in our reserves. But tragically, that's the attitude that they have towards Bitcoin.
In a state where we have, I believe it's a £10 billion black hole right now, from memory.
The size of the black hole keeps changing.
Exactly. And we're sitting on £5 billion worth of Bitcoin, where effectively nothing is being done at all about it. I'm not too savvy on what they are allowed to do, because as far as I'm aware, they have to try and reimburse those victims first, which there must be some form of statute bar before they can.
I can explain if it's helpful.
Definitely.
Do you want to? I can give you 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
Cool. So yeah, the issue with the UK's Bitcoin is complex, because it was confiscated from some fraudsters who were from the People's Republic of China. They had stolen yuan from people and then converted that yuan to Bitcoin. So bear that in mind for the victims. Now, one of the criminals has been convicted. 2 other convictions are pending. So at the moment, the Bitcoin is basically in limbo. What needs to happen is for those prosecutions to be successful and convictions secured, and then the government applies for a confiscation order from the court. Once that's successfully been applied for, then the government has title to the Bitcoin. Now, you're right, the Proceeds of Crime Act sets out what happens in terms of victim reimbursement, but the victims in this case lost yuan in 2014. So I think what will happen is the government will sell enough of the Bitcoin, like on day one, to reimburse the victims. And then after that, the law states that the remainder is to be sold and split between the Home Office and law enforcement. So that could potentially mean, and putting some numbers on this, I think the Met's annual budget is about 2.2 billion. So at the moment, it'll get, at today's prices, the Met would get an an entire year's extra budget in its back pocket. So our messaging to them is, perhaps learn a little bit about Bitcoin before you immediately start to sell it, and maybe consider a statutory instrument to include some extra wording to give the Secretary of State discretion whether or not to sell the assets if they are sufficiently valuable or based on some other criteria.
So I'm assuming here that the reimbursements would be at the yuan or GBP value or dollar value. It won't be the Bitcoin that it goes back. It will be a dollar or some form of fiat.
Yeah, the principle is that the victim should be put in the position they would have been in had the crime not occurred. So if you lost like 100 yuan in 2014, the assumption would be that there would be an interest or inflationary element added to that, so that your gross amount is effectively, in today's money, what you lost in 2014 prices. But there's no requirement to give them the stolen property, and that makes perfect sense. If a criminal steals your money and then pools that with the money of 100 other people to buy a house, you can't share that. You can't then give that house to the 100 victims.
True.
There's an additional complication. We've heard that the Chinese government has got involved on behalf of the victims and has asked to have the Bitcoin back, please, rather than the yuan. So there's a diplomatic element as well.
Yeah, I vaguely remember seeing that in the last few days, and I thought that could be an added spanner in the works here, because there's always debate around, like, for example, with FTX paying back some of their customers. Are they paying them back in the crypto value? So one Bitcoin lost, do they get one Bitcoin, or did they get the value at the point of loss according to the Criminal Acts law? And it's very interesting, because I feel like some entities will pick and choose depending on what suits them. And it kind of adds to explain why the UK would end up with so much potentially extra value because of that, because you'd think that they'd have to return everything where possible. But if they have an increase in Bitcoin value, then there'll be something back for the Met Office.
Yes, exactly.
So moving away from her, I want to talk a bit about the FCA itself. Now, we had a very quick discussion prior to recording this about restricted mass market investments that I thought might be interesting for our listeners and viewers to hear.
Of course. So this is a sort of very techie point, so bear with me. So the FCA a couple of years ago designated all cryptocurrency of all kinds as a restricted mass market investment. And that has a number of different knock-ons, both in a sort of compliance-wise and regulatory-wise, and also I think on a broader macro level in relation to business operations in the UK. So the immediate effect of the designation as a restricted mass market investment means that any business selling that mass market investment is drawn into the financial promotions regime. The financial promotions regime, as you know, heavily restricts what can be publicized around investment opportunities and invitations to invest and so on. Any public statement needs to be signed off by a suitable compliance officer, and there are a lot of things you can and can't say bluntly. And the immediate commercial effect of that on exchanges in the United Kingdom was a significant increase in business friction in terms of advertising and onboarding customers. I think those are probably the two key pain points that I would identify. Advertising has been terrible, so it's very, very hard for these small businesses to afford the necessary compliance processes in order to make sure that they're, because this advice is specialized and is expensive. Many of them, it no longer becomes economical to advertise in order to effectively let your customers know that you exist. So you will have seen there's very, very little advertising even from well-respected exchanges in the UK. I've recently seen Coinbase and Gemini begin to advertise again, but that will have been because they have been through a very lengthy and expensive compliance process in order to get those adverts approved, because they are now effectively financial promotions. And then in terms of customer onboarding, that also has become much more difficult, because restricted mass market investments can't just be sold to you like buying a Mars bar. You need to go through a series of questions designating yourself as a high net worth investor, as institutional investor, and so on, or as a retail investor. And then different rules apply to how much of your money you can spend per year on restricted mass market investments. And so, and there has to be a cooling off period as well for new customers. So if you're an exchange trying to operate in the UK and you're trying to attract new business, I don't know what your loss rate is in terms of how many customers lose interest between initial interest and waiting that 24-hour period, but it must be quite high, and the exchanges will have data on this. So in terms of throttling business in the United Kingdom, all of these different customer frictions and also restrictions on the businesses themselves in terms of, for example, how they can advertise their products, has really had a bit of a chilling effect on the development and growth of an industry that we should be dominating in the UK.
The actual restrictions on all this really would turn off most people trying to enter the crypto space. Yes, centralized exchanges are an easier on-ramping platform than, say, decentralized exchanges and trying to self-custody your assets. But as you've mentioned with those questionnaires, the amount of times I get tweets or messages saying, I don't know what to answer. And I'm sitting there going, you just have to tell the truth. Like that's that. I can't tell you the answers, because that's not how it works. At the same time, a lot of people were saying, oh, do I have a legal obligation to make sure it's absolutely spot on? And let's be honest here, Freddie, it's purely a tick box exercise for the exchanges to comply with all this, like all, BS aside. I don't think anyone really cares what you put down. It's just another barrier, unfortunately, including the 24-hour cooling off mechanism is the opportunity cost there. I would love to quantify it because I can only imagine you've got someone going, I need to buy this because of X, Y, and Z. Let me set this up. Within 24 hours, markets will shift dramatically. There's going to be a lot of losers within that period. Yet somehow the banks are trying to suggest that our money is still ours and we have complete freedom to do what we want with it, which is just not the way I see it.
Well, that's even before. It's good that you bring that up because there's all kinds of restrictions that banks operating in the UK place on their customers' ability to transfer money, for example, to and from legitimate exchanges, other regulated businesses like Coinbase. Very, very often, it's not hard to find these. You'll find examples of people trying simply to transfer money from their Monzo account to Coinbase and having that payment blocked. Some banks completely refuse to honor any payments to any cryptocurrency businesses at all. Starling Bank is very bad at this. They won't allow any transfers to any cryptocurrency business. I think Chase Bank have also brought in a similar proposal. We know Jamie Morgan hates Bitcoin. But when we've written on this subject to various ministers as well, the idea that banks can arbitrarily stop you from transferring your money to another regulated business is extraordinary.
Yeah, people should be able to do what they want with their fiat. And this is a strong concept that pushed crypto early doors, at least. The whole self-custody is effectively saying, I'm putting the cash under my bed and I can do whatever I want with it. It's not going to be with the banks. They're not going to control it. Because realistically, if the banks turned around right now and said, you know what, that Freddie knew with, I'm speculating you have random amounts of money. Let's say you got £1 million in the bank account. Good on you. If they turn around and decide that number is zero, there's nothing you can do about it. It's completely centralized. Now, on the flip side of all this, the FCA have recently, as of I think yesterday, announced that they have approved ETNs, exchange traded notes, to be dealt with within the UK. Now, this is a very small announcement on the face of it. However, the implications of that is that some people might be able to get their crypto gains tax-free through tax-efficient vehicles such as ISAs or maybe even pensions, much more in a more streamlined fashion, shall we say, than previously. Now, that is a huge win, if you like, for the industry, because it's, in my opinion anyway, more about being fair with other investment options like stocks and shares or maybe even property or cash per se to have these tax-free vehicles. Do you think that this is a good move from the FCA in terms of the UK Bitcoin scene? Do you think it's just a red herring or not much info?
I think it's trending positive is the important thing to say. This ban's been in place since end of 21. It was written at end of 20 and came into effect January 21 from memory. And it's really effectively protected people from a lot of gains, since if you put some money into one of these products in 2021, I imagine you'd be doing quite well by now. So unfortunately, the FCA has a a customer protection mandate, but it also has a growth mandate as well. And by completely freezing out an entire industry of new financial products from the United Kingdom, I think the FCA has completely failed its growth mandate. And sometimes I'd go even further and say it's failed its customer protection mandate as well. The reason for so saying is that customers got access to these things anyway, because it's how the internet works. And if you had an alternative between taking a relatively safe, regulated product listed on a London stock exchange and some random meme coin that someone was selling on a DeFi platform that you can access from your bedroom on your phone, what are you going to do? So I think arguably the FCA has exposed more customers to harm because they will have got this stuff in less secure ways.
I think it's ridiculous how the policies, guidance, and regulations are for crypto as a whole, which means they have put these meme coins and Bitcoin, for example, in the same bag. They're completely different, worlds apart. And there needs to be, in my personal opinion, a breakdown in terms of regulation between it all, because as someone who's part of a chief policy officer at Bitcoin Policy UK, it must be frustrating seeing all of this come through as a one brush, tainting everything in a single stroke. Any thoughts on that?
Well, firstly, you and I definitely need to connect on this because everything you said there is great minds. We have put that in written evidence to Parliament, and I delivered that in person earlier in the year. I completely agree, and actually, is one of our key policy points is that the word crypto is no longer really helpful in describing the space, and is reflected in the FCA's approach to it. The FCA it'll categorize a meme coin on Solana in the same way as an NFT, in the same way, as a smart contract, in the same way as Bitcoin. So our messaging has been, look, take a step back. We acknowledge that there are many different types of companies, and those companies have different risk profiles. So, for example, there is a great difference between Meta, which is listed in the United States and has a market cap similar to Bitcoin's actually, and a new co that I created in my kitchen, and I'm the sole director and I hold all the shares. Now, the shares of one of those companies can be offered to the public. They are listed on a regulated stock exchange. I'm not allowed to offer shares in my company in the kitchen to the public, and that's because the risk profile of that company is extraordinarily high compared to the risk profile of Meta, which is relatively low. And the last time I delivered this evidence was in front of Lord Vasey, who's now gone on to found the new all-party parliamentary group, and he got it. He's the first politician I've spoken to who got it. He said, "Oh, yes, I like that. We could have some kind of..." Actually, he thought my name was Jeffrey. "We could have some kind of Jeffrey Accords." So I said, "Don't worry, I can be Jeffrey for you if that's going to get us good regulation." But yeah, he understood that, and it's all about explaining the different risk profiles of these things. Bitcoin is a $2 trillion asset. Actually, you may know the answer to this. People are still saying Bitcoin is going to zero. And I was reading up on what are the biggest corporate value destruction events. I think the first one is Enron. I think there was about 770 billion. And the second, I think, was Evergrande at about 50 billion. So just to put that in context, for someone to say that a $2 trillion asset is going to go to zero is a value destruction event almost 3 times bigger than the other biggest value destruction event. So how logical does that sound to you?
It's completely illogical. Now, don't get me wrong, anything can happen. And the markets completely surprise me at every turn and angle. I agree that it could happen, but it would be catastrophic for were it to happen. And I think that in the case something were to bring or try and bring Bitcoin down to close to zero or, 3 or 4 digits, let alone zero, there will be, without sounding like an absolute nut job, powers beyond what you and I can comprehend to step in to stop that from happening.
Well, exactly. I mean, apart from anything else, it'll never go to zero. I've got a limit order to buy all 21 million Bitcoin if it ever goes to 1 penny.
Exactly. And you're one person with that sort of foresight into that. I very much doubt there's no one else doing the same thing for a higher number, 100, 200. Like if someone said to me right now, Bitcoin is shot down to £10,000, I am buying as much as I humanly can.
God, yes.
I'm not a very rich person at all. So imagine those who are succeeding in the crypto space historically with those funds to whip it up. So yeah, I think the chances of it happening personally are almost zero.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about Bitcoin within UK companies. Now, can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe touch upon BHODL a little bit, which is, again, congratulations on that going public this week.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so probably the most famous name in the space is the Smarter Web company. And so they launched their treasury strategy earlier this year and had phenomenal success. Their IPO is enormously successful, and I think their market cap's in the hundreds of millions now. So, all credit to them. They weren't the first British company to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet in that way, but they're the most significant and the most famous. And there are several others as well. The London Bitcoin Company is listed on the London Stock Exchange. They predominantly have mining operations, and they also operate a sort of Bitcoin treasury strategy as well, and fully regulated, obviously being on the LSE. Satsuma is another entrant to the market as well. And then ourselves, BHODL. We are we've got a strategic relationship with Coin Corner, who are one of our major shareholders, and a number of the other co-founders also have Coin Corner on their CVs. And then we've got a significant investment from Adam Back, who holds around 25% of the equity. We also had a retail offer to the public in the form of a wrap, and that was very well received and was oversubscribed. It's early days, and the key differentiator for us is that, firstly, with the first company to do this from day one, most of the others have had other operating businesses first and then adopted Bitcoin. We're Bitcoin from day one, and with a team full of technical Bitcoiners as well. And then the second thing is that we actually want to earn revenue denominated in Bitcoin, so to increase our Bitcoin treasury through our business operations. And the way that we're going to do that initially is via exploiting the team's expertise in running and operating and optimizing Lightning nodes for routing and for certain other services as well. If any of your watchers are unfamiliar, Lightning is a very fast payment layer that sits on top of the Bitcoin blockchain's settlement layer, as it were. So where the settlement layer is like a commercial bank in the ordinary banking world, the Lightning network is like a payment card scheme like Visa or MasterCard that sits on top of it. And those who make the Lightning network function lock Bitcoin into payment channels to provide liquidity, and in return for that and certain other services, small fees can be charged by the provider of the Bitcoin. So that's basically our business model in a nutshell, although I have to add that this is by no means a financial promotion, so none of us should get a slap on the wrist.
Of course, it's all for educational purposes and understanding the landscape we're within. I guess the point that I would like to highlight is you're not some guy who's trying to talk. You are literally living and breathing Bitcoin specifically within the UK and taking control of it, making steps towards what I presume is your belief system in terms of bettering the UK. Like, for example, why are we not all using the Lightning Network? It sounds like it's much more reliable, faster, probably cheaper as well. And there must be some form of level between where we are and how to get that in front of general retailers, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. We're beginning to see products like that one offered by a company called Musket. They offer an integrated behind the scenes payment functionality, full flight, and also a physical point of sale terminal. The interesting thing about the physical point of sale terminal is it can do all of your normal cards, but there's also an extra option, which is pay with Bitcoin. And you can either tap with a Bitcoin NFC card, or you can pay using a QR code, and job done. And the software behind the scenes handles all of the payment processing for the merchant. So it really abstracts a lot of the pain away. So if merchants want to accept Bitcoin and hold it on the balance sheet, there are companies already offering nice and easy, friendly UX, just something you're familiar with, payment terminal, pay with your phone, pay with your card.
And it also means lots of more accountancy issues and therefore more clients for me. And I think that genuinely is a barrier, whether I like it or not. It's more cost for the consumer at the moment and those people that want to get involved. But no, Freddie, you have been absolutely incredible today. Your insight into all of this is second to none, I would personally say. Really, I've enjoyed your presence here. Now, I've got a surprise question for you, which I ask all of my guests, and hopefully it doesn't put you too much on the spot before we sign off. What is your market prediction for Bitcoin specifically in the next, say, 6 to 12 months, if you're happy to share?
6 to 12. You know what? I'm going to be relatively depressing and say probably between the 100 and 110 range. I think it's going to either creep up or maybe chug down a little bit with some small recoveries. I don't feel that we're in an irrational exuberance period yet. I may be wrong, but the price, if you take out the blip in this spring, the price has been almost flat for about a year, and it could well keep on doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I don't think that's as depressing as perhaps you'd anticipated, to be perfectly honest there, Freddie. For example, we are, as a whole, me probably specifically, I'm expecting Bitcoin dominance to drop and an alt season. That's a very common narrative and thought process. You saying that it's to stay between above, 100,000, I would say it's quite bullish.
Oh, okay, good.
Personally,
Yeah.
but
Well,
no, thank you so much again, Freddie. You said you've been phenomenal on here. I'll get everyone to drop your follow and put your details in the description. So I believe we'll have your X account. Anything else?
Probably X is the easiest way to find me. And maybe if I link to the BPUK website as well for people to see our work.
Absolutely. I'll be more than happy to. I'm allowed to say shill it because I'm a big fan of what you guys do. But yeah, again, Freddie, thank you so much. I'll leave you to close us off with any final comments.
Well, just to say thank you very much, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.